answered. So the next presentation will be from Clare Farrow from Open Wing Alliance and the Humane League. As the Open Wing Alliance Sorry about that. As the Open Wing Alliance membership manager, Clare Farrow directs the coalition's global recruitment efforts and develops initiatives to access and improve the membership experience. She is going to talk about the very current topic with a presentation called Connection During Crisis, Adapting to Virtual Models of Collaboration. Learn strategies modeled by the Open Wing Alliance that you can use to keep your community connected despite new distance, to stay motivated and engaged online amidst hardship, and to thrive in virtual workplace. So this is Clare Farrow, and Clare, the room is yours.
Yeah, hello everyone. Give me just a moment to share my screen, please. One second. Okay, Martin, how does that look? Okay, great. All right, well, hello and good morning for me, but probably afternoon and evening for most of you. Thank you so much for coming to this talk today so that we can address connecting during crisis, adapting to virtual models of collaboration. Just as Martin said, this pandemic, which has now been going on for over half a year, depending on where you're located in the world, has presented really no shortage of challenges. It's really severely impacted many animal nonprofits' workflow and the programs that we're able to carry out. And it's really important that we take care of each other and our staff during this time so that we can help as many animals as possible. So today I am going to touch on 3 points, the first of which is how you can keep your community connected despite this new distance between us, how you can stay motivated and engaged amidst hardship, and how you can thrive in a virtual workplace. So I wanted to just start by introducing myself. My name is Clare Farrow. I'm the membership manager at the Open Wing Alliance. This is me this weekend with a brand new cactus, because one of the ways that I've personally been adapting to this crisis is sometimes with some impulse shopping and buying. However, I've had a lot more luck with adapting to the pandemic in my work life because of a few reasons. So the first is that my organization is a remote one, and we were remote before the pandemic. So I have experience working from home for over 4 years now. The second is that I just have a very unique position working for this coalition that is global and primarily virtual. In my role, I'm responsible for recruiting and onboarding new members, but also supporting our existing members. So I oversee our events and some of our internal communication structures and infrastructure, all means of which are keeping connected. I've also been part of our organization's Equity and Inclusion Committee for over 3 years. So I have navigated, unfortunately, several crises outside of just the pandemic, including the recent racial uprising that started in the United States, where I'm based a few months ago. So with that being said, since this is an animal conference, I thought it would be appropriate to also introduce my dog. This is my dog, Puck. There is a chance that you'll hear him during this talk. I'm hoping you won't. He's a very good boy, but he does like screaming out the window. So if you hear him, please just bear with me. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, as I mentioned earlier, I work for the OWA, the Open Wing Alliance. We're a global coalition of nonprofits working to end the abuse of chickens worldwide. So we have over 80 member organizations in more than 60 countries across the world. And I've had the privilege of learning from so many of them during this pandemic. So a lot of the ideas that I'm presenting to you today are going to be ideas that were inspired by or even directly copied by things that our member groups have been doing. And that's because the Alliance operates on a few key principles, one of which is collaboration. So we really believe that sharing information and insights and resources is crucial to achieving our mission together. And we think that overcoming obstacles is best done together. So this assumption is going to inform a lot of the suggestions that I make to you today, and really underlies the premise of the talk. I think that the best way to get through this crisis is to connect with each other. You know, we're animal organizations, but we're all powered by people. So we all have to stick together. So let's get started. Let's jump right into how to keep your community connected despite new distance. So humans are social creatures by nature, and the physical isolation that's required by this pandemic is a really big threat to our well-being. It's common and normal to feel alone or to feel isolated right now. And, you know, most people are grieving something, even if that's just the loss of what your life used to look like before this pandemic started. And connecting with other people can really maintain or try to establish some sense of normalcy. So my first suggestion to you is to dedicate time and space to fun. Most people think that this is something that happens naturally, and in a physical workspace, it is. You take lunch breaks together, you go out to get drinks after work together. But virtually, most people sit on their computer all day and only reach out to other people if they need something for a project or a meeting. So instead, you should very intentionally establish spaces to connect with other people and for your community to connect with each other. So one way to do this is through a Slack channel. Slack is a communication platform that I'll touch on later, where you can instant message anyone in your community, and you can organize conversations by topic. So the Open Wing Alliance has one pictured here. It's just called Fun, and people are able to type and chat with each other about whatever's on their mind, non-work related. So one of the things that came up recently was movie recommendations, and a bunch of people responded with what they've been watching these days. You can also replicate team bonding on video calls, and I think this is really an opportunity to get creative. So this is my team. This is the staff of the Open Wing Alliance, and we at the OWA do something called Tea Time. So every 2 weeks, we have a video call just for 30 minutes or so, where we get together and play a game or have some sort of icebreaker. And it's up to one person on the team to come up with one every week. And we just rotate that responsibility. And this can be really fun. It's great to not talk about work, to have a break during the day, break up the monotony of sitting at your computer. And it can be really fun. So one of the things that we've done is have people guess whose baby photo belongs to who. So here's one of mine. I am the redhead here. This is me in the 90s, rocking a very 90s outfit. Okay. However, I don't think that we should assume that group activities or spaces for fun will satisfy everyone's needs. So connecting doesn't just mean having fun together. We really have to go beyond that and do the hard work too of supporting each other when things don't feel fun, when they feel really hard. You know, doing some sort of virtual happy hour or whatever creative call kind of floats your boat won't always make people feel less isolated. They might even feel more isolated by fun activities if they're just not up to it and if they're, you know, having a hard time. And so one recommendation I would make for your fun activities is to make them optional so people can opt in based off of how they're feeling and join if they are seeking that sort of connection. Otherwise, I think in your communities, you should really encourage talks to happen one-on-one and to check in with each other one-on-one. And this could look like a lot of different things or take on many different forms. So it might be a regular meeting that a manager already has with their direct report. You might have a mentorship or a buddy program, or you might just have people in your volunteer community and network or in your staff who are just friends with each other. I don't think you always have to be the one to check in with every single person in your community, but you should be the one to make sure that every person in your community has this opportunity. So try to provide some framework. Some examples of ways you can check in with staff or volunteers are some prompts on the screen. So the first is just, what can I do to support you? Or how can I make your life easier right now? Something I've just tried is, some people on our team are taking longer vacations. Is this something that you would want to try? Or, hey, I'd love to check in. Do you want to touch base this afternoon and decide if we'd rather have a video call or a phone call? Or even just starting by sharing how you're feeling. So, hey, I've been feeling really distracted at work. How have you been? All these are different ways to kind of prompt people to share what's going on with them and get an idea of what their needs might be. Now, of course, checking in is really only half of the battle. Once you do have these conversations and get this information, you have to commit to following up and actually doing the work of supporting people and meeting their needs in whatever ways that you can. All right. The next piece of advice I have is to just be authentic with your communities. So be open and honest about how you're feeling. And I think a lot of us right now are really finding that we can't hide our emotions. It's a really difficult time to pretend like everything is normal because it isn't, and that's okay. And so everyone is really going through these moments of openness and honesty, and it's really a great opportunity to be vulnerable with each other. I think to date, at least in the States, there is this mindset that emotions have no place in the workplace, and that doesn't have to be the case. With that being said, you can be honest about how you're feeling without feeling pressure to have all of the answers. So your role as a leader here is really to just be thoughtful and share as much as you can with your community. One example of how my team has done this is that we used to share weekly highlights with each other. So once a week, we would share the greatest things that happened to us this week over text, share some photos of things we've been excited about. And since the pandemic started, we really pivoted that approach, and we just shared weekly updates, which doesn't have this implication that we have to share something positive. Because the reality is that sometimes we were having weeks where it was hard to think of anything fun. I was trapped in my house most of this week, and that's just the reality, and that's okay. And since we started doing that, just knowing that I'm not the only one who's feeling the way that I was feeling was really helpful to me. Okay. With that being said, while you should be authentic, you should also beware of emotional contagion. So this is the transfer of moods and feelings from one person to another. So you might be familiar with this concept already from things like someone yawns and it makes you yawn, or you see a baby laughing and it makes you giggle. This is emotional contagion on a small scale. It's very harmless, but this can also happen on a larger scale. And so emotions really are catchy, and if a leader in your organization is down, then the rest of your organization is going to follow suit, whether that's your volunteers or your staff or your extended community. And we really want to avoid that. And so this is a time where people are very stressed in their personal lives, and it's likely to carry over to work. And so I think one way that you can just beware emotional contagion is to do frequent check-ins. So every video call that you have with your team, you can spend the first 5 minutes just getting a read on how everyone's feeling and adapt what you're going to say and how you respond based off of feelings. And so if people are coming into a call, but they're worried about whether their performance is not up to par because they've been less productive, or whether they're still going to have a job because of financial insecurity during the pandemic, it will go a very long way if you can address those concerns before you try to do other work. And so this is your opportunity to just provide direction to people and really read the room, as they say. Okay, now that we have addressed how to keep your community connected, let's focus on how to keep them motivated and engaged amidst hardship. I think we're all facing so many troubles, and this goes outside of the pandemic as well. You know, our volunteers and our supporters and our engagers, they're always facing something in their personal lives that we might not know about, and it's important that we can meet them where they're at. So the first piece of advice here is to manage expectations. And what I mean by that is to expect less. So expecting less is really the first piece of this puzzle. It means that you have to expect less of yourself, your teams, and your work. It requires that you acknowledge that everyone is going to respond to crisis differently. So perhaps one person might feel very distracted at work and their production might be way down because they're reading a lot of the news and, you know, maybe a family member is sick. There are infinite possibilities. Whereas some other staff or volunteer members might want to dive right into work as a distraction from the outside world, and they might be way more productive than normal. Both of these, oh no. Did my screen just change for you, Martin? Okay, everyone give me a second. I'm gonna stop and jump back in. Let's see. Sorry about that. You know, this is perfect because coming up, I'm gonna talk about how to adapt to a virtual workplace. And one of the realities is that mastering technology is impossible and you can only do your best. Okay, let's see. Okay.
If anything goes wrong, we should have a backup presentation somewhere, so
Exactly.
we're able to do this.
Okay, let's see if this works. And let's make this full screen. Present. Okay, how does that look? Good? All right, thank you. Sorry, everyone. Okay, I forget exactly where I was, but I think I was just saying that everyone is going to respond to crisis differently, and that's okay. And in times of crisis, we should not expect anyone to be doing more than they would, or even as much as they would in a normal work environment. So once you acknowledge and come to terms with the fact that it is okay to be less productive than normal right now, you also have to manage those expectations and communicate them. So to your teams, you need to be really proactive and set the tone. So some ways that you could do that are just being very open about communication and saying, hey, let's look at the projects on your plate and figure out which ones we can put on pause. Or, we know that this is a challenging time. Please be really flexible with your colleagues as we try to navigate a pandemic. People might be slower than usual or be responding to you outside of normal work hours, or they might seem short. But we just want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt and assume good intentions. Or something like, hey, for the next year or so, our programs are going to look different than what we thought they would a few months ago. Here's our plan. Here's how we're going to prioritize moving forward. One way that the Open Wing Alliance has done this is with our grant program. So we do give out annual grants to some of our member organizations once a year. And all of those grantees are required at the beginning of the year to make goals, quarterly goals. And unfortunately, this coincided in the beginning of March this year, which was about the time that the pandemic was really ramping up, at least in the States. And so people were really intimidated about the prospect of needing to set these goals and not knowing what they would be able to accomplish when everything was so uncertain. So we responded and just said, the Open Wing Alliance understands that everything has changed and will continue to change. Given this uncertainty, just do the best you can to come up with goals that seem practical and reasonable at the present moment. If those have to change next month, or week, or even tomorrow, that's okay. Just let us know so that we can work to support your cage-free work as you figure out what form it will take. We're here to support you as we all navigate how the global crisis affects how we carry our work in 2020. And then we went on to say, in general, we want people to understand that plans are flexible and adaptable to changing times, and they should feel no obligation to carry out an activity that's no longer relevant or appropriate. So we have received feedback that people really felt like we cared about their work from being this adaptable and setting reasonable expectations, and that it essentially just relieved a lot of stress off of them from going through this process of having to make goals. Okay, so managing goals is one method of reducing uncertainty, and reducing uncertainty is so important right now because uncertainty actually causes more stress to you than if you definitively knew that something bad was going to happen. And I think that this is a really powerful and important factor to be cognizant of because, you know, as we know, most things are uncertain right now. We don't know how the pandemic is going to play out in the next month or even the next year. And so it's important for us to take control where we can. One way you can do this is to just provide regular updates to your team. So updates don't have to have all of the answers. The update could be, we started talking about the financial budget for 2021. Stay tuned, we'll let you know in November. You know, whatever your update might be. You don't have to have all the answers, but you should be upfront and transparent with your community, and they should know exactly when and how they're going to hear from you. So at the Humane League, the Open Wing Alliance's parent organization, we have already established a weekly email newsletter that goes out to all of our staff. We just have a section in there every week now for COVID updates. And I know to turn there, and it's relieved a lot of anxiety. Sorry about the loading problems. Another way that we've done this is managing expectations and reducing uncertainty about work plans. So pictured here is a bunch of OWA members from an in-person conference we host every year called the Global Summit to End Cages. This is our huge group last year. Typically, this is something that we would do in person, but this year we did end up moving our event virtually. And we host this event regionally as well in different areas of the world throughout the year. And planning these has become very difficult. I'm sure Martin knows with the CARE conference, because we don't know if people will be able to travel internationally this time next year. We don't know if it's safe to ask a bunch of groups to come together in person. And so one way we've tried to reduce uncertainty is for all of these events, we've just set a deadline, a benchmark before the event of when we will decide whether or not the event is in person. I think originally we found ourselves just waiting and seeing if things would get better, and we delayed our planning a little bit. So just set deadlines for yourself of cutoff times for projects if they are impacted by the pandemic. Okay. I know that I've given a lot of suggestions for ways that you can interact with your community, but above all else, it's so important to engage in self-care right now and engage in self-care first. It's a really natural response for managers or leaders or community organizers to totally overlook themselves in trying to take care of everyone else in their community. But I try to think of this like, if you've ever been on a plane, they say something like, in the event of an emergency landing, put your oxygen mask on before you put one on a child next to you. And that's because if you run out of oxygen and you pass out, then that child will never get a mask on. So you really have to help yourself before you can help other people. You also set the example of how you take care of yourself, and your team will follow your lead. So studies have shown that even just having a manager who's highly anxious can produce staff that have higher blood pressure. So there are like literal physical effects of having stress managers. There are a ton of resources out there for self-care, and so I'm just going to mention a few today that I think are more important than ever given this very unique pandemic situation that we're in. The first is to just literally schedule time on your calendar for self-care. Make breaks throughout the day and commit to them. It's very easy, especially working from home, to just be stuck in your chair all day, and these reminders can go a long way. I also recommend remembering to move. These may or may not be during your self-care calendar blocks, but again, the power of moving cannot be understated. Get up and stretch, or go on a walk, or take your dog out, whatever feels right to you. The third is a lot easier said than done and might look different for everyone, but it's just to be nice to yourself. Part of this is about managing expectations, so expecting less from yourself than you could do in normal times, but it's also about fighting this sense of urgency. So as we shift to a virtual work model, you might find yourself with way more emails than normal or way more notifications than normal. And because the time we are in is so serious and demands action and attention, you might feel that way about work too. But I promise you that the emails can wait. There's no sense of urgency. Don't get too upset. Just be nice to yourself about all of the work on your plate. The fourth recommendation I have is to connect with people who are in similar positions to you. So this might just be a 30-minute call every other week, whatever works for you, but connect with other leaders or managers or field organizers to see how they're feeling and what they're doing. I think that a lot of people feel this pressure to come up with all of the solutions themselves, but there is no need. Something that I've learned at the Open Wing Alliance is that I don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of these groups around the world have way more experience than I do that I can learn from and really just cherry pick the solutions they've already tried for myself. And so turning to other people for support is huge. And then lastly, I recommend practicing gratitude. And I especially recommend this during the pandemic because I think a lot of our normal means of self-care might not work or be as effective. So for example, maybe I used to write out a problem and map out how I can address a problem. But a lot of my problems right now are out of my control. And so practicing gratitude is a means of control. You can even implement this on your teams or in your communities. For example, you can bookend gratitude at the beginning of and end of every call. So I might say, hey, Martin, thank you so much for being here as I'm going through these technical difficulties. It was a lot less stressful knowing that I have a backup and that you've got it covered. And that's authentic and that's genuine, and that can really impact your just sense of self and your happiness at work. And I think that if you're practicing self-care and sharing what you've learned with other people, again, people take the lead from you. And so if you are taking breaks and you have these self-care blocks in your calendar and encouraging other people to do the same, research has shown that doing so increases nearly all people's likelihood to stay with any given company or organization, and it doubles their sense of health and well-being. So taking care of yourself just as an act alone is really powerful. And I think that you should share what you've learned. So this small gesture goes a really long way. The way that we do this at the Humane League is normally just through a couple different channels. We have a self-care channel, and we also have a channel on Slack for managers. And some of our leaders have just shared articles they've been reading about whatever it is that they're going through. And I found it to be really helpful. And so if you can present what you've learned, it's just an outpouring of support that shows other people that you care about them. And it's also a great way of supporting others because you can basically opt into this. So you're not assuming what anyone's stress levels or scenarios are. You're just presenting this in the event that this link or article is applicable to you, here it is. And so I've found a lot of benefit from that. Okay, then lastly, we're going to talk about how to thrive in a virtual workplace. Again, there are a lot of resources out there about engaging in work from home, and you don't need to come up with new solutions. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Turn to other organizations who are already doing this to find out what's working, is my biggest piece of advice. But with that being said, I think that how you communicate is a huge, or has a huge impact on your workflow. And so video calls trump phone calls, which trump any form of text communication. This might seem obvious, but being able to communicate face-to-face is a great way to avoid miscommunications. There's no way to read between the lines or not type out what you're saying. And we can just, over videos, use so many more means of communication that we would have in person. Like, well, we can try to have eye contact, we can use hand signals, we can point to props, we can have body language. All those things are just like communication keys that we can pick up on. With that being said, now that we are 6 or more months into the pandemic, a lot of people are experiencing what we call Zoom fatigue, which means that they're having way more meetings than they used to in person, and they're finding it really exhausting. And so one way you can switch this up is just having a variety of meeting types. So maybe video meetings are your default, but on some one-on-one check-ins, you might just be able to have a quick phone call. Whatever works for you, just don't assume one size fits all. Okay, back to technology, as unfortunately we have experienced live. Mastering technology, I think, is the best thing that you can do to have a thriving virtual workplace, which means finding platforms that really work for you. I cannot praise Slack enough. When I was making this presentation, I was wondering if it was going to sound like I'm sponsored by Slack. I am not. But Slack is an instant messaging platform, like I said, that is just a great way to organize conversations and have back-to-back conversations, whereas email flow just really requires more of a level of formality, and perhaps more people are looped in than need be. So with channels, you can opt in to the conversations that are applicable to your role. So for me, I might have a recruiting channel or an onboarding channel, but I'm not going to be part of the grants channel because I don't do our grant work. So that's one way to just get the right people involved. And then you can really customize your notification settings. So you can mute it during the day or during a work block that you have. You can have yourself only notified if your name is mentioned or your organization is mentioned. It's just very highly customizable, and it really decreases this like never-ending email pile that tends to happen during work. Okay, the next is to build structure in virtual workplaces. So one thing that people love about working from home is the flexibility that it provides, which is great. People like to work outside of hours or normal hours, maybe work in your bed or from your pajamas every now and then. However, over time, this can really add up and make you feel tired and less motivated. And so building structure and routine in your day is a great way to keep yourself going. So the first thing I recommend, if you haven't done so already, is to just establish a physical workplace that's separate from your other living spaces. I know that this is not possible for everyone, but if you are able to set up a desk or a counter space that's dedicated just to work, that you can physically leave at the end of your workday, that can be really powerful in helping your brain just shut on and off and say, I'm in work mode now, or I'm off work mode now. Same for your schedule. Whenever possible, try to schedule some sense of routine. This will help yourself stick to work and avoid overworking. So when people are working from home, they tend to take more meetings than they would if they were working in person. And they also tend to just never stop. Especially now, we can't leave our house, there's nothing else to do. And so a lot of people will end up getting burnt out because they work so much. So try to establish a routine for yourself as well. With that being said, I'll wrap up with just know the risks of working from home. I just touched on some of these briefly, but working from home blurs the line between your personal life and your professional life, and it really puts a work-life balance at risk. And so in whatever ways you can separate your personal life and your work life and maintain a personal life and things that you do outside of work will really benefit you. So if there are anything that I want you to take away from the presentation, it's these three things. The first of which is that it's your job to provide structure and certainty to your community during really uncertain times. So schedule regular team updates and communicate your adjusted work plans and expectations during the pandemic. The second is just understanding that your community is made up of individuals, all of whom have different needs. So provide as many varied opportunities for people to connect as you can. People want to connect, support each other, or even take a break. And all of those things should be things that can happen in the workplace. And lastly, is to just practice what you preach and engage in self-care so that you can be the best leader you can possibly be. So I'll wrap it up with a thank you and open it up for questions. It looks like we have just over 10 minutes. Before we jump in, here is my contact information if you want to reach out or continue this conversation. I'm cfarrow@thehumaneleague.org. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, Claire. You are right. We have almost 13 minutes for discussion. I would like to remind all of you that we ask questions through Slido. So please, you will find the instructions in the Zoom chat and you can post your questions directly there. You can also vote for the questions you would like to hear answered. So far, we have no questions in Slido. So if you would like to add something in the meantime, Claire, now is a good time for that.
I don't have anything to add. I would be curious if anyone wanted to type in the chat what their experience with the pandemic has been and how the pandemic has impacted your workplace specifically.
Before anyone will have time to write something in, I can at least share mine, so we don't just spend time in silence. In our organization, we were already working mostly remotely, but we used to have regular meetings with the local groups. But this could not happen anymore, so we had to switch into online meetings. And from the beginning, it was not very easy, and the attendance was really low. But afterwards, people got solidly used to it. So now we are completely remote, and it works actually quite well. We are capable of keeping the morale high, and it goes much easier than I was afraid of it would. So far, our experience is not that bad.
That's great. Yeah, I know I touched on a lot of the risks that come with working from home, but I love it. I think it really works, at least for me personally, and I think it's a great option for organizations. So I'll be curious to see when the pandemic is over, if a lot of organizations stick to a virtual model or if they do go back to an office.
No questions so far, and nothing in the chat. Oh, we've got a comment from Julia Mrechelska. It's been a good experience for me because my uni classes switched to online, so I could move from Warsaw to countryside with a lot of nature, and it's a much better environment for my mental health.
That's great. I love seeing people who have benefited from this change in scenery and workplace. I'm very jealous.
Another one from Tanya. I've also been working remotely nearly 10 years, so it's almost embarrassing to say that I've not taken a huge hit of the pandemic in this regard.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I think for people like us who have been working remotely for a long time, you really can step into this role of like sharing what you've learned and how you've made it work for you for people who are making an adjustment. Yeah, similarly, I was so grateful that a lot of my life changed when the pandemic hit, but at least I already had my little desk and my little spot to work from, and I could keep that the same.
Anyone else who wants to share? Because we still have no questions, so maybe just some comments and share experiences would work instead. Yeah, there's another comment from Tanya. Exactly, being able to support others has been great. Okay, so far we're not receiving much responses. So Claire, do we want to give it a couple of more minutes or do we just make an extended break?
I think an opportunity for a break is great. I'll just put my email in the chat one more time if people do want to connect personally, or if people want connections with any of our member groups who have really succeeded during the pandemic. So again, it's cfarrow@humaneleague.org. And thank you, Martin, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much, Claire.